Hi everyone, number one Marmaduke fan here, and I have insomnia. So, do you know what time it is? That's right, it's time to talk about the unbeatable Squirrel Girl and Anonymous Noise, and Kyoko Hikawa's From Far Away, aka Kanatakara. No, stop it, right hemisphere of my brain. We cannot talk about this same manga every single time I review a manga or Western comic. But gee, left side of my brain, it's so cool. No, stay away, tangents. Oh, okay. Hey, look at this. I marked all my pages to keep the tangents away. We're making progress. So anyway, Squirrel Girl and Anonymous Noise. Why do I want to talk about these together? Because they have some interesting parallels for a neat comparison contrast on comedy writing and the importance of being considerate in writing. So the unbeatable Squirrel Girl, I mean, what's there left to say about it? The Diversity in Comics channel, our boy Zach, I think he has pretty successfully roasted this comic until it's well past well done. You know, by the time the steak is a black chunk of charcoal, what's the point of continuing to roast it? So what I'm going to try to do is, rather than just repeat the same argument Zach has made issue after issue about the unbeatable Squirrel Girl, I just want to look at it briefly, maybe make this more of a retrospective on how sad I am about this comic. You know, because when I look at it, I look at what could have been. And then we're going to look at Anonymous Noise for a positive example of a similar storytelling problem. So, when I read The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, I find myself thinking about economics a lot. For example, there's a famous saying in economics that there is no such thing as a free lunch. Now, since I got this from the library, well, it sure seems like I got to read this comic for free, right? But oh, no. You see, when I got this comic, it probably took me about 3 seconds to check it out from the library on the self-checkout machine. And you see, those 3 seconds are a commodity. Those are 3 seconds I could have been using curing cancer or starting a business, something more fruitful than the act of checking out The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. And that's of course before you bother spending any time trying to read The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. After spending 3 seconds on The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, getting it for free at a library, I have already spent way too much on The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, and I want my 3 seconds back, let alone the 30 minutes of trying to slog through it to get some creative thoughts. So I'm not going to dwell on them too deeply since Zach has talked about it, but let's kind of review real quick in our brains what are some of the criticisms that Zach has had of this comic. That the art, you've probably seen the kind of weird wonky faces being shared in memes, so the art's not that great. The story by Ryan North, he's complained that it's incapable of being funny. He's complained about the teeny tiny little font that's got to be like smaller than 4 point at the bottom, delivering a gag, missing the point that the point of comics is it's a visual medium. You can't just put a little sentence at the bottom and call that a gag. All this is struggling to read something that could have been a gag in the comic, but instead was tacked on the bottom of these pages. Lazy writing in some of the wording, which is awkward and doesn't make the gags work. Referential humor, referencing pop culture from the 60s when this is allegedly supposed to be a kid's comic. Positive affirmation of Squirrel Girl pretty much saying, I'm super duper awesome, and all her friends existing to say how super duper awesome she is. The feeling that this is a pseudo-ironic comic made for people who hate comics or want to pretend they like comics. What I learned from reading The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl is I kind of went in thinking, I mostly agreed with our boy Zach, but you sometimes wonder, well, gee, is he kind of playing it up a little bit for the camera? Is he, exaggerating a little bit to have a good time? There is no way to exaggerate the problems in The Unbeatable Squirrel Girl. And if this was just a mediocre comic, it would still be sad. The fact that this is a mediocre comic that has won an Eisner Award makes it much, much worse. Now it's not just a mediocre comic anymore. Now it's a mediocre comic that is denigrating the value of the Eisner Award and is an insult to the name Will Eisner. This is a comic which actually hurts the comics industry Because, oh yes, economics. I love thinking about economics instead of trying to think about Squirrel Girl. So the other economic principle that Squirrel Girl makes me think of is arbitrary demand. So arbitrary demand is when people have a demand for a good, but it's not really real. It's there because the government is messing with the market, or because people have an incorrect assumption, like they think that every comic book is going to be worth $1 million someday. So there's all this arbitrary demand for it, but really it's not worth that much. So when libraries pump up the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl, and I worked in libraries as a tutor, so I would see this in every library. There'd be a little picture that says, "Great comics for kids, Squirrel Girl." Kids love it. And when you read like the press on the front saying how wonderful it is, Squirrel Girl is something that had to be created by an awful industry, an awful comic news press, and a library system that didn't care about the quality of the content, just said, okay, so-and-so says it's good. Okay, well, let's buy 5 of them and put it, okay. So, since I don't want to think too much about Squirrel Girl, since I hate trying to think about Squirrel Girl, we're kind of doing a thought experiment. Like, so you're a kid, you don't have any of this like SJW Marvel drama in your mind. You don't really have a long history or connection with Marvel characters. You're just looking at comics in the library. And this young person approaches Squirrel Girl, the Eisner Award-winning Squirrel Girl, apparently one of the best and brightest things that Western comics has to offer, and a very typical shoujo manga that actually isn't meant to be consumed by boys mostly. It's actually targeted specifically for girls. And I think not only would young girls gravitate towards this, I think young boys would gravitate towards Anonymous Noise more than Squirrel Girl. So I made all these tags. Okay, let's look at the bad in Squirrel Girl so we have the negative in our mind so we can get to Anonymous Noise. I'll go quick. So tag number 1, Squirrel Girl talking about her butt and how awesome her butt is. Well, I have an idea. What if Squirrel Girl felt some human emotions? What if she was self-conscious about her butt at first, and then she went on an adventure, and then at the end of the adventure, she learned to be less self-conscious about her butt? Then we could see her go from having a problem to solving her problem and becoming more self-confident. Then it would seem like she was growing, like she was going on a journey. But instead, because this is all about how super duper awesome Squirrel Girl is, then of course she loves her butt and everyone loves her butt. Okay, this little page. This is a page where when I say that Squirrel Girl is a tragic comic, this is part of the tragedy where I blame Erica Henderson's art only 5% now for how bad Squirrel Girl is. One of the things you learn when reading Squirrel Girl is 95% of the blame for this being a bad comic is right on the writer, Ryan North. I don't believe any artist could have saved a story this bad. But Erica Henderson clearly likes to draw, silly, goofy drawings. And I actually like silly, goofy drawings. And I think in this little scene, she's drawing in a way that's a little bit more comfortable for her. She still has trouble drawing a chin, when a face is pointing up. But that's really hard for cartoon characters. This is a little bit more of a comfortable drawing style for Eric, and she feels uncomfortable in her drawing style everywhere else in this page. So maybe she was trying to ape superhero heroics, or maybe she was trying to, I don't know, make it hard for patriarchy to use the male gaze on this comic or something. But throughout the rest of it, the characters consistently feel awkward rather than comedic. And the uncanny valley isn't the same as adding humor to your drawing style. There are a couple little moments where I was mildly amused and one moment where I laughed. So I was mildly amused by this because Squirrel Girl's showing an emotion. She loves Iron Man. She's overwhelmed at the prospect of getting to wear Iron Man armor, but this tail thing is gross. I'm sorry, my mind goes to the toilet, but it looks like a giant turd to me that's hanging off an Iron Man suit. Design. You got to design it so it actually looks cool, so her expression and her reaction makes sense with what she's actually getting to wear. This scene is the worst scene in the whole book, and my honest question to Ryan North is, did you intend this hostage scene to just be silly? So we're supposed to be laughing at what's it, Whitehead, Nancy Whitehead. Are we supposed to be laughing at her and how stupid she is and how she would get herself killed in this situation? Or are we supposed to be admiring Nancy Whitehead and saying, wow, Nancy Whitehead is so brave. what a badass. She's just making fun of the armed robbers and, walking right up to the gun in her breast. This is an instance of the kind of the 10 minutes in, we're going to finally get the thesis of this video. The tangent containment isn't working, but the thesis of this is in order to make comedy writing work, you need to have a bigger point than it just being silly. Looking at this was the one gag that almost worked. So this illustrates the point nicely. So Squirrel Girl is going to go fight Galactus, turn the page, and she's beating Galactus. And I laughed because I thought, that's hilarious. They're not going to show her beating Galactus, but then Ryan North spoils the joke. And he says, let's rewind in time and show you how she beat Galactus. No, it was funny when I didn't know how she beat Galactus. And, oh, look, she's got a big butt. I don't know, that looks like pretty male-gazy to me. But anyway, everything you would need to know to fix Squirrel Girl is actually in the Steve Ditko drawn introduction of the character from 1991. And as much as I love Steve Ditko, there are some very poorly drawn panels in this particular story. But I think Steve Ditko still understands a lot about emotional resonance for a character. And another tragedy of this comic is they actually pulled a lot of interesting ideas out of this to try to build the character of Squirrel Girl, but I think Ryan North spoiled it by reducing this to a bunch of silly antics without any emotional weight. So, like observation 1, her tail is more pointed and angular. It's not just a big, fluffy, gross thing like on that Iron Man suit of armor. It's a little cooler. And the other neat thing is that Squirrel Girl you see awful faces. So in spite of that, Squirrel Girl will sometimes cover her face with her tail and show embarrassment. That's a cool little emotional thing. This is a conflicted character. She seems very chipper. Tee-hee. She seems kind of nutty, tee-hee-hee, and self-confident, but she also has some shame and self-doubt to her, and this humanizes her. There are a few scenes where, as she's explaining that people at her school call her a rodent, she looks downcast, and either she's covering her face with her tail, or her face is in shadow as she looks down and dejected. And the other thing about this is, yes, she has kind of a silly, nutty behavior, but the entire story has an arc to it, which gives context to her silliness. She is silly, but Iron Man is serious. She is silly, but Doctor Doom is evil. He's much like he is in a regular, serious comic. Now, of course, Doctor Doom's a little over the top, and he speaks in the third person. He's a megalomaniac genius, but he's being played as the sinister threat that he is, which means that when Squirrel Girl beats the evil, all-powerful Doctor Doom, it is funny because a serious person is being defeated by a silly person. Ryan North picked up on a lot of little interesting details, like she stuffs her tail into her pants, haha, so that makes her butt look big. But they missed the point that Squirrel Girl works by being a foil to serious characters. When everyone is a silly Billy, baby, then it doesn't work anymore because everyone is just like Squirrel Girl. The rule in improv comedy is never point out the 800-pound gorilla, and you can see this working in something like Monty Python. So maybe Ryan North watched some Monty Python. He said, oh boy, there's all this silly random stuff. Your father smelt of elderberries. But Monty Python isn't just funny because there are random things. It's funny because for a lot of their sketches, for their best sketches, there's a silly thing being combined with a serious thing. Think of the Three Stooges. The Three Stooges is funny because, beep, bop, nyuk, 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 all the silly sound effects and the slapstick comedy. But it's also funny because the Three Stooges end up in a story. So they get confused for psychiatrists. And then the Three Stooges, everyone thinks they're super serious doctors, so they bring them to the rich lady who's crazy so that the Three Stooges can treat her. That's silly. That gives context to the silliness. So the point of this is, goodbye, Squirrel Girl. In contrast to Squirrel Girl, if you want to tell a story with good comedy, it helps to have a point to it, to have a context for it. So, Anonymous Noise has some similarities to Squirrel Girl. We have, young characters. These are high schoolers, and Squirrel Girl is in college, but the high schoolers are actually more mature than Squirrel Girl. But we have immature characters with, character flaws and silly personalities, but their silly personalities are defined enough that I can understand them. So I reviewed Volume 1 and Volume 2 of this. My review of Volume 1 is I thought it was kind of weird and I didn't really get it, but I laughed a lot. So I wanted to read Volume 2 because of that. And by the end of Volume 2, I was in love with this because it was consistently hilarious. I think I laughed about once a page, and because I was laughing so much, then I became interested in the melodramatic soap opera romance. If it wasn't as funny as it was, I probably would have gotten tired and said, I'm sick of all these love triangles, because Ryoko is so good at comedy pacing that got me invested in the characters and their love lives. So, Anonymous Noise, what to say about it? Well, I, of course, read Volume 1 and Volume 2, but even if this was your first one, well, look, you can get caught up on some of the basics of what's going on. And then as you watch the characters interact with each other, you figure out who they are. So in Squirrel Girl, this would be silly, 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 silly. She thinks she's awesome. He thinks she's awesome. He thinks she's awesome. She thinks she's awesome. Almost no one thinks Nino is awesome in this, including Nino. She has self-doubt, but she does have a silly personality. So how are they silly? Nino is silly because she is too antisocial and she's too direct. So she doesn't listen to people and she kind of like bulldozes through something, kind of like Peppermint Patty. She's not a good listener. Momo is a bit silly because he's very masculine and talented, but he also... If Nino was my daughter, I tell her, screw that guy. You're better off with someone else. But he has some redeeming characteristics in spite of being a jerk, which is that he's actually a pretty good friend to Yuzu and gives him some, good, straightforward advice. And he actually has a lot of shame and self-doubt. So in spite of my dislike of this character, he's not completely irredeemable. Yuzu... If Momo is the tall, handsome, masculine guy, Yuzu has a Napoleon complex. He's really short and he's sensitive about it. He's a brilliant musician, but he doesn't get any support from his family, so he has to kind of hide his musical talents. And both of them have a dual kind of relationship with Nino. They both love Nino, but they also both love her voice. So it's almost like music is a metaphor for love in this silly... even though it's a silly kind of cheeseball-y manga, it still has all of these great themes for you to chew over and think about. Okay, Miyu, well, she used to be the singer on the band, but she has conflicted feelings, so she moves aside to make space for Nino, and there's kind of a rivalry where Miyu represents a more serious musician. She's more... she has a lot more practice. She has a lot more... a classically trained voice, and Nino has a raw voice. She's not very well classically trained. She hasn't mastered the basics, but she has a voice with character. So that already gets you thinking about like natural talent versus effort. And Nino does work really hard. It's just she discovers that maybe her best effort isn't enough, and so she's challenged. She at first starts out with this silly little dream that if she can sing, she'll find the little boy from next door who went away forever, and she hopes if she sings, she can find him. So what I expected this comic to be was 9 volumes of her singing, and then at the end, she'll get together with him. No, that's not what it is. It violated my expectations by actually building on the promises of Volume 1 and Volume 2. She actually does find Momo quite early on, and she discovers that he's not impressed by her voice, so she has to push herself to get better. The other characters, they just add some comedy and, few little subplots, but they don't distract too much from the meat and potatoes of the story. So what have I marked? So if you're a kid, and you didn't even see Volume 1 and 2, you're going to flip through and you say, oh, okay. No, that's kind of cool. And then what Ryoko Fukuyama does is she actually delivers on something. So at this point in the story, Squirrel Girl would still be singing her dumb theme song, which isn't even a good version of the Spider-Man theme song, which kids don't know because they probably haven't watched the cartoon from the 1960s. Ryoko uses her time to give you this, a 2-page spread with Nino screaming her head off, and it's nuts, and there's lines everywhere, and even though there aren't like superheroes beating up bad guys, I think a little boy would look at this scene and think, whoa, that's crazy. She's screaming her head off. What? That's nuts. This is so weird. And so again, Nino has a flaw, which is that she doesn't have much self-control. She tries to sing, but when she gets emotional, she starts screaming more than she's singing. But this kind of works for their alternative rock, and then all the rest of them have to kind of like make it work as Nino's losing control. It's so weird. I marked this because this is a little instance of Ryoko giving us some of her personality. So Ryoko has these little editorial comments about her writing process, and what this is a good illustration of is that Ryoko pays attention to her surroundings. She takes walks in her neighborhood to get inspiration for her work and to get reference images. So it's really good to take a walk outside and bring some of that work into your writing and into your drawing. Ryoko does that. And she does show off her kind of like, silly, grandma personality, but it's contained within these sweet little editorial comments, and it doesn't infect her work. This whole work isn't about, tee-hee, I'm such a weird and silly grandma. She has those cute little humanizing moments here, but then, for this, she tells you a story. She cares about her craft. I marked this. Okay, this is an instance of Nino doing something silly. So she gets this guitar and she runs up. Oh, what's so important that I had to meet you at Yugi Hama? Guitar! What? Guitar! Yeah, I know it's a guitar. So what? Guitar! Are you even listening to me? So this is a silly thing. She's saying the word guitar over and over again with like big bubbles in her speech bubbles. Something like this is silly. Isolated from context, you might get a giggle out of it, but a way a gag like this works is if you connect with who Nino is and you get the character archetype. She is someone who is blunt, and even though she seems kind of like feminine and bubbly at first, she has this really intense laser focus to her that makes her miss things and be kind of socially awkward. So then the silly thing becomes funny because we connect it with real life people we've met like that. We understand that what she's doing is a little bit weird and a little bit crazy. And all of these, silly moments of Nino being a little bizarre, well, those are funny, but should this be taken seriously? Yes, this also does drama much better than Squirrel Girl does. So when Miu and Nino have like their big argument over, the boys they love and how they're rivals, Nino, because she's kind of nuts, she runs into the ocean to grab the earrings that Miu threw away. And Miu thinks she's nuts, and she says, I can't sing for him for 6 years like you. That's insane, Nino. So Nino has been waiting 6 years to find the love of her life again, and she hopes that singing will bring him back. And Miu acknowledges this as insane. Because it is. It's silly. It's played for laughs. But in real life, this would be insane. And Nino acknowledges the insanity of her childish dream. That's incredible. That's incredible because up to this point, I've been laughing at Nino. And then suddenly there's an emotional, serious drama moment based on the very silliness of this character. They're acknowledging the silliness and making it work for drama in the context of a romantic story. So the humor's funny, yeah, but it's humor that is making me find attachment to these characters, and then it is doing something serious with the characters as well. And it remembers to kind of like take breaks. So, like there's a little comic relief, but then we got to take a break and get serious for a little bit and, get real and have some real emotional connection. And like I said, it doesn't just keep me floating around forever. So she came really close to seeing Momo. She found out that he didn't like her voice, and so that's what made her work extra hard on improving her voice, because she believes if she can sing beautifully enough, that will like speak to his soul, and Momo will come back to her. So I was thinking, okay, well, I'm gonna getting ready for 9 volumes of them never seeing each other until the very end. But no. Then in volume 3, she sees Momo. She gets what she wants. She's been looking for Momo. She found Momo. Well, that means that I don't have to sit around waiting for her to see Momo forever. She's seen Momo. Well, now what's going to happen? You violated my expectations. What's going on? And it builds and builds and builds from that. And, Yuzu, I'm kind of rooting for him because, like short boys united. I want the short boy to get the girl, not like the tall dreamboat to get the girl. And he mans up a bit, and he has some emotional back and forth, and he has his own sort of weird That's what it is. This is a good book to illustrate sort of how artists, especially young artists, have all of this weird emotional turmoil that they don't know how to cope with, and so they channel that into their art. And that's exactly what these kids are. They're all kind of emotional basket cases, and they're all musicians, and they channel all of their emotional turmoil into their art, and they end up making really good art because of that. I love this. This is made by a thoughtful artist who, it's weird. It's a silly soap opera romantic kind of deal, but her absolute nailing of comedy and her ability to integrate the comedy into a story that is semi-serious, and it's over the top, but there are serious themes dealt with in a silly book. And so the consequence is this book wins. Now, the moral of the story is Eisner Award-winning Western comic, a manga that I grabbed because it had A in the title. Now, I've read bad manga, but I still have not found a manga with art as bad as this. There are manga with very poor storytelling and lazy storytelling conventions, but I don't think that's fair. I don't think it's fair to make Ryan North representative of Western comics, because I don't believe there is a writer on planet Earth who is as lazy as Ryan North. Oh, it's sad. I don't just want to roast Squirrel Girl. It's a sad example of wasted potential, of the Marvel brand being harmed, of this character being harmed. This was so fixable. It was so possible to do an emotional story with Squirrel Girl where she was silly, but being silly didn't define everything that the character was. We're at 26 minutes. That's enough talking about Squirrel Girl and Anonymous Noise. I'm #1 Marmaduke fan. I love you guys. Try not to dox myself. I love my patrons on Patreon. I think I'm going to try to go to bed. Hopefully the insomnia does not curse me further. Catch you later.